It's Anna again from the Yarn Randomizer, and this will be my third shawl retrospective where I go over the next 10 oldest shawls that I still have with me. And so just to get the preliminaries out of the way, if you like, subscribe if you enjoy this. If you've been watching the first two, I hope you enjoyed this third one. If you haven't seen the first two, I recommend going through those because they're kind of interesting to go through in order for the lessons learned I had from some of the shawls and everything. But other than that, let's get down to it. So the next one, or the first one, this one, is one called Easy by Martina Van, and I hope that's the right way to pronounce her last name, but it was the same person who the designer behind The Hitchhiker. And so this is a very long, it's really classified as a scarf. You can see it's relatively narrow. And the interesting thing about this is you knit a bunch of it and then you change direction. So you knit this long section until you have all these live stitches along the edge, and then you start knitting this crossways section here. And so you get this nice shift in the middle of it. So it works really nicely with a variegated yarn. And this is a very heavily variegated yarn. So this yarn was from Stephen B. up in Minnesota. It was a yarn club for the Marvel movies, of all things. And this one was related to the Captain Marvel movie, this colorway. I think Higher, Faster, or something like that is the colorway. It'd be all, I'll have that all in the notes for the show. And the really fun thing about this shawl is I actually knit this while I was traveling in Peru, I think in 2019. And so there are lots of pictures of me knitting this while I was traveling there. My husband and I went to go see Choqquequirau. We hiked up to those ruins and visited those while we were there, which was really a lot of fun. But yeah, and so I would say this is a great one skein piece, particularly for a skein that you're not sure what else to do for, and it's just a really simple wrap with an interesting detail in it, and as the title says, it's easy and stuff. So I really enjoyed this one, and again, garter stitch all the way through, and so super easy and very squishy, and turned out very nice. So I recommend the pattern. All right, the next one in order, if I look at my list, yes. So this one is Jimmy Bean's Wool Craft Event 2019. And so this was one that used for the first time some, I think some Surrey alpaca. And so let me see if you can see the fuzzy bits, the gray, that's the Surrey alpaca. And then it had a nice sampling of different yarns from different makers in there. And so a lot of interesting colors. And I think, I'm trying to remember if there was more than one colorway available. Again, this was not a mystery knit along. It was, they had pictures of it before you knitted it. And so it's long ways done scarf. Those rows can feel really long after a while. That's narrower on one end than the other. And it was interesting. I enjoyed knitting it. It's got some very simple lace patterns in the in-between sections. And I haven't worn this as much. Let's see if I can get this wrapped around here. And so yeah, it has a really nice appearance to it. Let me get the mohair out there, or the Surrey out there. Really neat colors and everything. The only issue that I have with it is it wants to curl sort of this direction, almost like it wants to curl into a tube with the wrong side out. And I'm going to take a shot at giving this another blocking to see if I can get it to behave better, but that's the only thing that kind of makes me hesitate on this pattern in this shawl is that. And I typically roll this up for storage in a way that tries to work against that tendency to curl up that way. So I tend to roll it this way for storage, which is what, if you're curious about how I store my shawls, is I kind of roll them into these little logs and store them away up on the shelves I have here. But yeah, it's really nice, great colors, nice simple lace patterns, and overall a fun knit. But again, a little bit plagued by the rolling problem, but perhaps, if you can see, it's not that severe, and so perhaps it could be addressed a little bit, but it was definitely enjoyable. And I really like sampling a bunch of different fingering yarns. Is a lot of fun and everything, and the result is really nice. So there's that one. All right, and oh, the name of that shawl, actually, let me see if I can see what the name of that is. That one, Spirit of the Season was the name of that shawl. And again, all of these will be linked below. All right, now, because of the time of year and everything, I tend to get the December shipment for the Jimmy Beans Wool annual shawl next, so between the 25th and 30th of December. And so the next finished shawl on my list is the Jimmy Beans annual shawl from 2019. And I have to say, this is probably one of my favorites of theirs. It's got a big crescent shape. You can see in my blocking pictures for this shawl that it's got a really nice shape. It's got really nice usage of a kind of a fade from the denim into grays, into kind of a grello and then yellow, and then on into some more speckled, and then some nice contrast colors for the outer edge. But yeah, it's just so nice. And on top of that, the way this shawl finished off was on the outer edge, you did an I-cord bind off, but you picked up stitches along the entire outer edge of the shawl to do an I-cord bind off along every bit of it. So you can see that's along every bit of that shawl. So if you've got a set of 20-gram minis or something like that that you think will do a nice combination like this, this pattern is very nice. Oh, and let me get the name of the pattern. And this has ended up being one of my favorites of all the Jimmy Beans Wool patterns. It's very nice, and I'm not doing the best job zhuzhing it up here, but you get the general idea. It is just a really nice shawl. Has some nice short row shaping in there, some nice lace patterns later on, and these nice dots, which is the reason behind the name. It's called the Sunshower shawl, and that's by Amba O'Brien. And so it's just got these nice details, and I think the shawl would look nice maybe in a solid, but it's a great way to combine some different colors in there. And so it's probably even though I'm a big fan of rectangular shawls, at this point, this is still probably one of my all-time favorites here from Jimmy Beans Wool for their annual shawl. All right, so links on that will be below. It's all Madeline Tosh Merino Light is the entire thing. So it's all garter, all Merino Light, and it's just incredibly soft and wonderful to wear. All right, next. Let's see. The next one. So I don't know how many of you know the Cozy Up Knits, the sisters from, is it Alberta? Is it Alberta, Canada? Up in Canada. And they have an annual mystery knit along at the beginning of each year. And I had discovered them and watched a bunch of their podcasts and decided to join in January of, was that January of 2020? I guess it was. And so this one is I think Up the Creek is the name of this one. let's see, yes, Up the Creek MKAL from them. And so I used a couple of, Wonderland yarns that I had. You would have seen these in my little the stash tour, as this kind of plum and this dreadfully frightening, this black and white yarn with little pops of color in it. Let's see if you can even see that. I'm trying to see if there's any place you can see the colors in there. A little bit there. And so this shawl has these basically 3 triangular pieces, has these big tassels on here. These 3 triangular pieces were knit separately and then seamed together, which I think caused a little bit of controversy among the knitters. Most folks typically expect a shawl to be this one shot and everything. I didn't mind it that much. And it was kind of an interesting, different construction and everything. So, let's see, think of the best way to put this on. So I guess my main thing with this one is, if you don't like seaming, you're not gonna like this pattern, for one thing. And the other part of it was I was a little disappointed. I was hoping the yarns would coordinate a little better considering the little pops of color that were in this black and white yarn, but those pops of color just don't stand out. And so really you just get that kind of more of the black and white effect with just you see a little bit of it. But yeah, so it was an interesting knit. I wouldn't say the most enjoyable knit, and the seaming was okay and everything. But I have to say they've got plenty of other wonderful shawls that you can do as well. Lots of really beautiful ones. But this one, I've worn it every so often. I like it, okay? And so it gets worn on a semi-regular basis. You can probably hear the motorcycles going by outside. It is a very nice warm day here right now, so and I'm traveling tomorrow, so I'm trying to squeeze this in right now. All right, so that's that one. I think the thing that I remember being very difficult on this was there were make one right and make one left increases at the beginnings and ends of row, but because of the nature of some of the stitches in here, those were super tight in some cases. And I think that the yarn over, using a yarn over instead, and then using that yarn over in the same way you would do a make one left, make one right on the following row, would be a better, it was easier, which is, I think I actually did that when I knit this one, but I know that was another place that people struggled with this pattern. All right, so that's that one. All right, next will be one that's probably familiar to folks, and this one is the Free Your Fade from Andrea Mowry. And so this was one where I think all the ones except for the Easy, the first one I showed you, which was a yarn randomizer, none of these other ones were yarn randomizer projects. But this was one. And so I actually had somebody who was visiting the house pull a yarn from the yarn randomizer. Let's see if I can figure out which side is right and which side wrong. I think this is the right side. And so they pulled this spun right round. I think it's newsprint. Again, it'll all be in the project. And then I had to go and look and see if I had anything else that would go with it. Now, so the newsprint has this black and white kind of speckled look. What I picked to go with it was this stem colorway from Apple Fiber, one of theirs called STEM, S-T-E-M, for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math. I picked this up at, I think, Vogue Knitting Live in December of 2019. And I really liked those neon colors with the black. And so there's a little bit of the white, a little bit of the black. And so I felt like it looked good with the newsprint colorway. And then I used a gray kind of tonal at the other end of it. And so I think the overall result ends up being a really nice fade. I think it turned out really well. And I really enjoyed the pattern. And one of the things to show, a couple of things to show you is you'll notice that some of these eyelets are larger than others. In the pattern, she has you do wrap twice for some of these eyelets, and you can see that some of them are larger in the work. And I also did the picot edging that she describes in the work, which I'm really happy with as well. And so this has ended up being one of my favorite shawls. It's been worn a lot. And so I like the shape. It's a good size, and it shows off the yarns really well. You can actually, I think, get a third wrap out of this in some cases, as long as I don't strangle myself here. Yeah. Oh yeah, there you go. And so it is just a really nice, and it shows off all the colorways really nicely. And again, that stem is one of my favorites. I actually used all 3 of these yarns in a pair of socks later on as well. But yeah, so that's Andrew Maui's Free Your Fade, and very good pattern, good size knit, and it was definitely fun to do. All right, now next on deck, let's see. It is the Zorzal. This is by, let me take a look. Lisa Haynes, I think Haynes, Lisa Haynes. And I think I saw someone wearing one of these at a knitting group that I went to, and I asked her about the pattern, and she told me it was this Zorzal pattern. And so this pattern basically takes 2 skeins of yarn, and it does some striping, some solid sections, and some more striping. And it's a really large crescent. And it's got this detail of these very large, you do these yarn overs along the edge as well. So you have those large openings there. Tassels are part of what's recommended in the pattern. And so this one produced a really good size shawl. And the nice thing was, these were 2 yarns I never bought. Like so many times when I'm combining yarns, these were yarns that were not purchased to go together. The one of them is just a, oh yeah, one of them is just a Madeline Tosh sock, and that's the blue one you see here, like that. And the other one is a junk yarn smooth sock. And I think these at least one of these came up in the stash tour that I did, the first one that covered the light fingering. So the neat thing about the junk yarn, and the junk yarn I think was from an annual sock club from Jimmy Bean's Wool. The nice thing about this junk yarn is it's got little bits of this blue in here that really call in this kind of reflect that that colorway, that Undergrowth is the name of the Madeline Tosh colorway. And I just thought they went so well together. And the ends of the shawl do this kind of zigzaggy thing when they're hanging down. Again, another big garter stitch shawl. A nice use of 2 skeins to complement each other. And the result was really nice. It seems like most of these kind of hit it out of the park. Once you start being a little more discerning about what patterns you're doing and everything, you find some really amazing patterns out there. And I think the common theme is the garter is part of it. But next couple of patterns, you're going to see the other thing that contributes to a well-crafted shawl that doesn't curl, doesn't have issues curling. So these don't have these, like the Free Your Fade, and this one don't have an issue because they're garter, and so they are well behaved as far as shawls go. And then let's see, oh yeah, there's the right side again. Now these next 2 are well behaved because they are done in such a way that the knitting is on the bias. And so let me bring this next one up first. this is the next one in my list, and I've got this rolled into this big hot dog bun of a roll here. So this yarn, this was the yarn set, and if you look at I think at the project, you'll see the set of yarn I used, and it was a set of yarn that had one main skein and probably 12 minis that went along with it. And it's from a company called Delicious Yarn. I don't know how much she's dyeing yarn anymore. But this came out of my yarn randomizer, and I wanted something that used as much of it as possible. And so this pattern is Torquata by Amba O'Brien. And what it has is it has these lace sections here. You can see these. Let's see if we can see one that shows it well. Let's show you the gray here. So it has these very simple lace sections with these kind of triangular eyelet groupings and everything, separated by some garter in the main color. Now this has no problems with curling at all at the edges. And I actually didn't have to pin this aggressively, but the amount of yarn I had was massive. And so when I knit this thing using as much of this yarn as possible, this shawl ended up being, I think it's more than 10 feet long. And I tried to use the colorways in such a way that they did not so much a fade, but they complemented each other. Like I started with the green, I have this cream with green and brown, then mostly a brown with some cream, and then a cream with some brown and raspberry, and then kind of this raspberry with some gray in there, and then black with the raspberry, and so forth. And so you see each one kind of suggests kind of a hint of the previous one all the way to the other end. But it is enormous. And so I do wear this occasionally, but it's such a huge shawl. Like I can't even, it's like dragging the floor from the other end here. And so this is going to go around a minimum of twice if you want to wear it that way. Now I could also just drape it over my shoulders, but it'd be a pretty dramatic statement, you know, if I wore it to an event or something like that. But yeah, it was Delicious Yarns. And this Torquata was a great pattern for using up a main skein and a set of minis if you had something like that. And I made sure to knit, like for each of these lace panels, I knit as many rows as I could using the mini. I don't know if the actual pattern used 4 repeats of the little triangle eyelet clusters, but I squeezed out as much as I could. And so this thing is just enormous as a result, but it's extremely cozy. It turned out really nice, and I'm really happy that I was able to keep all that yarn. I think I didn't use 2 skeins that didn't seem to quite fit into that kind of sequencing that 2 of the minis I didn't use, and that was it. So I used, I think it was, how many minis? Like, well, it's all in the details on the page, but it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So there were 12 minis in total with a main skein, and I used 10 of them with this. And I also, same thing with the garter stitch separation, I did some calculations to try to figure out how large I could make those separations as well, to try to use up as much of the yarn as possible. But yeah, turned out very well. Recommend the pattern, particularly if you have a main skein and you have a bunch of minis to use with it. All right, now we're back to the end of the year again. And the next one is the Jimmy Bean's Wool Craft Vent again for 2020. And this, you know, I sit there and say that other annual shawl was my favorite, the one I showed you, the crescent shaped one earlier. But I have to say, this is one that just blew me away in its appearance. And so this is more of the, I think it's Tosh Merino Light again. And it's just got this incredible sequence of colors and that mosaic knitting to create those boundaries between the different lace areas. And so it's got a huge variety of lace stitches in there as well. And you can see this thing has no issues with curling at all. And it actually blocks out to square ends. They fill in basically with the decreases in the middle, they fill in those corners and they fill in the wedge on the other end. And this is definitely a shawl that I wear a lot. And I have a variety of things, like it even goes with this shirt to some extent. But yeah, so lots of fun lace patterns to try. Some great colors. I loved the pop of red that's in here. And so this one was one that was really happy with. And I think there was at least one other colorway they had that year. If you look up the pattern itself, and let me actually tell you the name of the pattern. Tidings to Yew, Y-E-W, is the name of the pattern. And it was just a really wonderful pattern to knit. Just because there's such a nice variety of lace patterns in there, and that mosaic separation of the sections was just a really nice detail that turned out really nice. And the use of some really strong pops to separate sections was really neat as well, like that, and the purple at this other end. But a really nice, and boy, is that gold, is that color something else? Just really nice. So yeah, good pattern. It's by Amy Gunderson. And so that was just such a nice knit. It turned out so nice. As it turns out, the next year would also be a super nice knit. And that will be in the last shawl retrospective. Now, we've got 2 more to go. So the next one is the annual shawl again. Again, it always shortly follows the craft vent one. And this is one that has a really incredible set of colors in it. I know I get a lot of compliments about the colors in this one. Coral Coast Wrap, and this is an Amba O'Brien pattern. This is another shawl that's done lengthways. And again, those long rows are not to everybody's taste. They're kind of a pain, but you get some interesting results with that approach. And so you can see there's just this amazing shift from these browns and oranges up to these blues here in the pattern. And there's an incredible variety of lace patterns in here. If I can show this, yeah. So those big eyelets there, and just some beautiful details. Standard feather and fan at the end, I believe. And again, just a really neat variety of laces all the way through. And some of them are repeated. You can see that, for example, the brown here and this kind of pink color here, I believe that is the same pattern. And some are similar, like they do this with more garter in it, but it's the same as this section, but some of the rows are knit instead. And so just a really nice result. My only hesitation here again is there's a little bit of that wanting to curl, but not as bad as some, but it still wants to curl a little bit at these long edges. And so it could be a little better behaved. So you can see this wants to curl back right now. And so, this on here, again, this is one that goes well with my shirt. But yeah, I really love these colors. And again, my only hesitation here is this little bit of curling that it definitely wants to do there. And so you kind of have to work against that when you wear it. And again, down here, you see the same thing happening. When you wrap it around you, it definitely wants to curl up along those long edges. But yeah, beautiful, beautiful shawl. some curling issues. And again, so I like it. It's not one of my favorites. I don't wear it that often. But it was definitely an interesting knit. I would say, can't say I'm a big fan of the long rows. Those can get a little tedious after a while. But yeah, again, I recommend the annual shawl that they do at Jimmy Bean's Wool, like the one I'm working on this year. I'm really liking, and if you're watching the Yarn Randomizer podcast, you're seeing that. I actually just finished March for that, and their annual shawl and their craft mint are always a lot of fun. But again, the majority of the fun, as I've commented before, is about the community, that is helping other folks, seeing other folks work, and just being able to chat and have fun talking about these shawls as you're working on them. All right, so yeah, that was the Coral Coast wrap, and again, all of these will be linked below. And then my last one, oh yeah, here it is. This is more of a scarf than a shawl, but I want to include it here. I had a couple of small skeins of, and I'm not going to say this, Koigu Painter's Palette yarn, and so it was just enough to make this one called Terrain, and that's by Janina Kallio. And this is a pattern. It's it almost reminds you, let's see if I got it right side out. There we go, like that. It's one of those things where you have these decrease areas and increase areas with some yarn overs in there to do some lacy effect. And it was just a nice way to use up this colorway. And this one I wear a lot because it's just so tidy. I wear it like under my coats and everything. And it's just really a nice little knit. And it doesn't take that long. Let's see if I can show that off there. Is that the right? Sometimes a little, that's the right side right there. And so it's just a nice little knit, and I frequently will pull this one out to wear. And you could even probably, let's see if I can pull this off, you'd probably even do maybe this, maybe if it were a little longer, it might work a little better, but that way of pulling it around if you really want it bunched up nicely. But it was a really fun knit and used, I think, again, this might be a good one skein type of work to use a shawl, use a skein you're not sure what to do with. But again, the detail is just really nice, and it was an very easy knit and everything. So yeah, so that is all of my, that's the next 10. So this was up to number 30, and I've got, I think, 9 more completed shawls to go through. One of them, which I talked about on I think the first podcast, but I'll cover it again since it's a completed work. Maybe even 2, maybe even the Sophie scarf I'll put in there as well. But other than that, that's the next 10 shawls. So a lot. Again, the only disappointments you see in there is some minor curling issues. But you can avoid those with well done, either these garter stitch balanced stitches, balanced patterns, or lace work that works on the bias. That is, like, even with this one, well, this one has the best of both worlds here. This is primarily garter, and although you can see it's got some flat stockinette areas in there, and it's got these different, this bias increases and decreases happening all over. But bottom line is, if the edge of those lace patterns, like on this shawl, are along a bias edge like this, where you've got constant increases going on or decreases going on, one or the other, you'll get a nice, well-behaved edge on the shawl. And so I think that's something that's worth looking for. The thing I found that's interesting is whenever I've run into curling with a shawl, I will sometimes search to see if anybody's written notes about whether they've had issues with curling, and very, it doesn't seem like very many people comment on it when it happens with a pattern. And you know, I probably should look back and see if I include that information as well. I think what happens often is you finish the shawl, you block it, and that's kind of the last word that happens on the project page. And what the reality is of wearing it and how it behaves sometimes doesn't make it in there, perhaps. But yeah, so I hope you enjoyed that. If you like, like and subscribe if you've enjoyed this. And I will be traveling tomorrow, so it might be a little bit before my next podcast. My next stash tour will be covering half of my fingering yarn, and I'll also do that when I get back. But I hope you're all well and enjoying yourselves, and enjoy your knits.